The Galactic Council chambers had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence as Admiral Krex of the Vorthak Empire delivered his report. His 4 arms trembled as he spoke, each word carefully measured to avoid any hint of the terror that had consumed his fleet. The human vessel was unremarkable, Krex began, his voice barely above a whisper. A simple transport ship, designation Morningstar. Our sensors detected minimal weapons, standard defensive shields, and a crew of only 12. It should have been a routine inspection. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy as apex predators. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, with razor-sharp claws and armor-like carapaces, they had conquered 17 star systems through sheer brutality. Their reputation for ruthlessness was so well established that most species simply surrendered upon seeing their distinctive crimson warships. "You boarded the vessel?" inquired Senator Zephyria, her crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. The Etherians rarely showed emotion, making her obvious concern all the more unsettling. "We attempted to," Krex replied, his mandibles clicking anxiously. "My warriors breached the airlock without resistance. The humans offered no initial opposition. They simply watched us. Even when we demanded they submit to inspection, they remained calm. Unnaturally calm." The council murmured among themselves. Humans were a relatively new species to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years prior. They were considered primitive by most standards, lacking the advanced technology, psychic abilities, or physical prowess that defined the major galactic powers. "What changed?" asked General Thorak of the Brutarian Horde, his massive frame leaning forward with interest. The Brutarians respected strength above all else, and any species that could unnerve the Vorthak demanded attention. Krex's eyes darkened. The child appeared. A collective intake of breath rippled through the chamber. Even species that didn't breathe seemed to react to the weight of those words. "She couldn't have been more than 7 of their years," Krex continued. "Small, fragile-looking, with that pale skin and strange-colored eyes they possess. She was carrying some sort of stuffed creature, a toy of some kind. My warriors laughed when they saw her." Laughed. The Admiral paused, his claws scraping against the podium. The girl looked at my second-in-command, Lieutenant Vex, and asked him why he was being mean to her family. Vex is a veteran of the Sector Wars, decorated for his brutality in 17 campaigns. He's personally executed over 3,000 prisoners without hesitation. "And?" prompted Thorak impatiently. "He started crying," Krex said quietly. "This hardened killer, this veteran warrior, began sobbing like a hatchling. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, apologizing over and over again. The child walked up to him and patted his arm, telling him it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Several representatives demanded clarification. Others questioned the Admiral's sanity. The idea that a human child could break a Vorthak warrior mentally was beyond comprehension. "Silence," commanded High Arbiter Malthus, his ancient voice cutting through the chaos. The Archon leader was older than most civilizations, and his word carried absolute authority. "Continue your report, Admiral." Krex nodded gratefully. That was when I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The girl wasn't using any technology we could detect. No psychic emanations that our sensors could measure. Yet somehow, she was affecting my warriors on a fundamental level. He activated a holographic display showing the interior of the human ship. The images were grainy, taken from his warriors' helmet cameras before the mission went catastrophically wrong. As you can see, the child approaches each of my soldiers in turn. She asks them simple questions. "Are you sad? Do you miss your home? When did you last see your family?" Normal, innocent questions that any child might ask. The footage showed heavily armed Vorthak warriors, each capable of tearing through steel with their bare claws, reduced to emotional wrecks by a small human girl. Some wept openly, others sat in stunned silence. A few had removed their helmets, and were staring at holographic images of their own offspring. She offered them juice boxes, Krex added, his voice hollow with disbelief. Small containers of sweetened liquid that human children consume. My warriors accepted them eagerly, as if they were precious gifts rather than simple refreshments. The implications were staggering. If humans possessed some unknown ability to neutralize even the galaxy's most feared warriors, the entire balance of power could shift overnight. The council members exchanged worried glances as they began to grasp the magnitude of what they were hearing. Admiral, Malthus said slowly, "What happened to your boarding party?" Krex's proud military bearing finally crumbled completely. They refused to leave the silence that followed Admiral Krex's final words, stretched for what felt like an eternity. 47 of the galaxy's most powerful species struggled to comprehend what they had just heard. The Vorthak, conquerors of worlds, reduced to emotional wrecks by a human child. "Explain," High Arbiter Malthus commanded, his ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia. Krex's claws scraped against the podium as he steadied himself. "When I ordered the retreat, my warriors ignored me completely." Lieutenant Vex was sitting on the floor, showing the child images of his spawn back on Vorthak Prime. Sergeant Call was attempting to braid her hair, despite having claws designed for ripping through armor. The others were playing. General Thorak leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. The concept seemed alien to a species that knew only warfare. "Games," Krex confirmed, his voice hollow. "Simple human children's games." The girl had somehow convinced my elite warriors to participate in activities called peek-boo and patty cake. Soldiers who had never shown mercy to an enemy were giggling like juveniles as they clapped their claws together in rhythm. Senator Zephyria's crystalline form pulsed rapidly. "Did you attempt to forcibly extract your personnel?" "I tried," Krex admitted. "When I entered the ship personally to retrieve my warriors, the child approached me directly. She looked up at me with those strange blue eyes and asked if I wanted to see her drawings. Before I could respond, she had taken my primary claw in her tiny hand and was leading me to a table covered in colorful papers." The Admiral activated another section of his holographic display. The Council watched in stunned silence as the footage showed the most feared military commander in the Vorthak Empire being led around by a small human girl as if he were a gentle pet. "She showed me pictures she had drawn of my warriors," Krex continued. "Crude images made with colored sticks, but somehow she had captured something about each of them that I had never noticed." Vex was depicted with a flower crown, labeled "Nice Warrior Who Misses His Babies." Call was drawn surrounded by what appeared to be small Vorthak youth, with the words "Good Teacher" written beneath in the human's primitive script. The implications were staggering. The child hadn't just neutralized the boarding party. She had somehow seen past their fearsome exteriors to identify qualities that even their commanding officer had missed. "How did she know about their personal lives?" asked Representative Quinn of the Mechanoid Collective. "The artificial beings processed information differently than organic species, but even they seemed troubled by the child's apparent omniscience." "That's what terrifies me," Krex replied. "She knew things about my warriors that weren't in their service records. Personal details, childhood memories, fears they had never shared with anyone." When she spoke to Sergeant Call, she mentioned his worry about his eldest spawn's difficulty in combat training. Call has never discussed his family with anyone under his command. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. If humans possessed some form of advanced telepathy or empathic abilities, they represented a threat unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. "What was the child's demeanor during these interactions?" inquired Dr. Alanis of the Healers Guild. The medical expert's 6 eyes blinked in sequence as she processed the information. "That's perhaps the most unsettling aspect," Krex said. "She was genuinely kind. Not manipulative, not calculating, just good. She offered my warriors comfort without expecting anything in return. When Lieutenant Vex began crying, she climbed onto his lap and hugged him until he felt better. When Sergeant Call mentioned missing his spawn, She drew him a picture to take home to your babies, so they know their daddy is thinking about them. The Admiral paused, his voice becoming even quieter. She invited me to sit with them for lunch. A simple meal of what humans call sandwiches and fruit juice. As we ate, she asked about my home, my family, my hopes. Not as an interrogator seeking information, but as a child who was genuinely interested in my well-being. General Thorax's scarred features contorted with confusion. But surely you recognized the threat and extracted your forces? Crex's proud military bearing crumbled further. I found myself telling her about my mate, about the ceremony where we bonded, about my concerns for our upcoming spawning season. Things I had never shared with anyone, not even my closest advisors. She listened with the complete attention that only children possess, occasionally asking innocent questions that somehow cut straight to the heart of my concerns. The holographic display shifted to show the human ship's departure. The Vorthack vessels made no attempt to pursue or intercept. When her parents announced it was time for them to continue their journey, she hugged each of my warriors goodbye. She gave them small gifts, drawings, flower chains made from the ship's hydroponic gardens, even some of her own toys. My soldiers wept as she waved farewell from the airlock. High Arbiter Malthus leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on the Admiral. And your assessment of this encounter? Crex straightened slightly, attempting to recover some of his military dignity. The humans may not possess advanced technology or superior firepower, but they have something far more dangerous. They have the ability to make us remember what we once were before we became conquerors. That little girl didn't defeat my warriors through strength or cunning. She reminded them of their own capacity for gentleness, for love, for hope. The chamber fell silent once more as the representatives contemplated this revelation. In a galaxy where power was measured in firepower and territory, the humans had introduced something entirely new, the weapon of pure, innocent compassion. We need more information, Malthus declared finally. This incident cannot be isolated. If humans possess this ability universally, we must understand its scope and limitations. But even as the council began planning their next moves, each representative found themselves thinking about the small human child who had effortlessly accomplished what no military force had ever managed. She had made the galaxy's fiercest predators remember their own human at 3 weeks after Admiral Crex's testimony. The Galactic Council authorized the most ambitious intelligence operation in recorded history. Codenamed Project Innocence, it involved deploying agents from 12 different species to observe human settlements throughout their territory. The mission was simple: determine whether the child aboard the Morning Star represented an anomaly or a universal human trait. The results that poured in from across human space defied every expectation. Commander Slash of the Reptilian Hegemony had volunteered for the mission partly out of skepticism and partly out of pride. The reptilians had evolved from apex predators and maintained their hunting instincts even in their spacefaring civilization. If anyone could resist whatever psychological manipulation the humans employed, it would be someone like Slash. His target was a human educational facility on the colony world of New Geneva. Intelligence suggested that hundreds of human juveniles gathered there daily, providing an ideal opportunity to study their behavior in large groups. Slash had expected to find some form of military training facility disguised as a school, perhaps where young humans learned the techniques that had so thoroughly defeated the Vorthack boarding party. Instead, he found chaos. Slash's initial observation post was a tall tree overlooking what humans called a playground. Through his scopes, he watched dozens of small humans engaged in activities that seemed to serve no strategic purpose whatsoever. They ran in circles, climbed primitive structures, and engaged in complex social interactions that appeared to follow no logical pattern. Day 1 of observation, Slash spoke into his recording device. Human juveniles display erratic behavior patterns. No obvious military training detected. Subjects seemed to be enjoying themselves. The concept of enjoyment for its own sake was foreign to reptilian culture. Every activity served a purpose, hunting, mating, territorial dominance, or survival. Yet these human children appeared to be expending energy on pursuits that offered no apparent benefit. On the second day, Slash's carefully planned surveillance operation encountered its first complication. A small human with bright red hair spotted his camouflage position in the tree and called out, "Hey, why are you hiding up there?" Before Slash could react, a crowd of human children had gathered beneath his perch. Their teacher, a tall female with kind eyes, approached with obvious concern. "I'm sorry," she called up to him. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The simplicity of her offer stunned Slash. Here was an obvious alien threat observing their young, and her first instinct was to offer assistance. It had to be some sort of elaborate trap. "I am conducting research," Slash replied carefully, maintaining his position in the tree. "Oh, how wonderful," the teacher exclaimed. "Are you studying human education? The children would love to show you around if you'd like to come down." Against every instinct screaming danger, Slash found himself climbing down from his hiding spot. The moment his clawed feet touched the ground, he was surrounded by a mob of excited human juveniles. "Are you a lizard person?" asked the red-haired child who had discovered him. "Do you breathe fire?" inquired another. "Are those real claws? They're so cool. Can you teach us how to climb trees like that?" The barrage of questions came faster than Slash could process. In reptilian society, showing interest in a stranger was considered either a threat assessment or a mating ritual. Yet these children seemed genuinely curious about him as an individual, with no apparent fear or hostile intent. "My name is Emma," said the red-haired child, extending a tiny hand toward Slash's massive claw. "What's your name?" "I am Slash," he replied hesitantly. "That's such a cool name," Emma exclaimed. "Like a superhero. Do you want to see our classroom? We're learning about different planets today. Maybe you could tell us about yours." Before Slash fully understood what was happening, he was being led by the hand through the human facility. The children chattered excitedly around him, pointing out their artwork, their plants, their pet hamster named Mr. Whiskers. None of them seemed to find his appearance threatening or unusual. In the classroom, Slash found himself sitting on a tiny chair designed for human children, surrounded by eager faces as he attempted to explain reptilian culture. Every brutal aspect of his society was met with thoughtful questions and innocent observations that somehow reframed his entire worldview. "So, when you hunt for food, do you say thank you to the animal?" asked a boy named Marcus. "Thank you," Slash repeated, confused. "Yeah, like to thank it for helping you not be hungry anymore. That seems polite." The concept of gratitude toward prey had never occurred to Slash. In reptilian culture, the strong took from the weak as a matter of natural law. Yet this human child was suggesting that even in the act of survival, there was room for respect and appreciation. "And when someone gets hurt in your fighting games, do you have Band-Aids?" asked Emma, producing a small, colorful adhesive bandage from her pocket. "We always patch people up after accidents." Slash stared at the tiny medical device. Among reptilians, injuries in combat were badges of honor, left to heal naturally as proof of one's strength. The idea of immediately tending to an opponent's wounds was so alien that it took him several moments to formulate a response. "We do not typically tend to the wounded," he admitted. "That's really sad," said a girl named Sophie. "Everyone deserves to feel better when they're hurt. Maybe we could send you some Band-Aids for your friends back home." The offer was made with such genuine concern that Slash felt something crack inside his chest. These children weren't just unafraid of him. They were actively worried about the well-being of creatures they had never met, simply because he had mentioned them. By the end of the day, Slash found himself participating in what the humans called circle time, where children shared stories about their day. When it was his turn, he spoke about his homeworld, but found himself focusing not on the conquest and domination that defined reptilian civilization, but on the beauty of the twin suns at sunset, the way the crystalline caves sang in the wind, the intricate patterns that frost made on the mountains each morning. "Your planet sounds really pretty," Emma said when he finished. "Maybe someday we could visit, and you could show us around." The idea that anyone would want to visit reptilian space for pleasure rather than conquest was so unprecedented that Slash spent the entire flight back to his ship contemplating its implications. His report to the Galactic Council was a masterpiece of confused military prose, attempting to describe an encounter that had no analog in any known tactical manual. The human children hadn't defeated him through superior strategy or overwhelming force. They had simply been kind to him, and somehow that kindness had proven more disarming than any weapon he had ever faced. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 37 days after the first human encounter. Representatives from every major species had gathered, their usual diplomatic composure replaced by barely contained anxiety. The reports from Project Innocence had shattered fundamental assumptions about power, warfare, and species interaction that had governed galactic politics for millennia. High Arbiter Malthus called the assembly to order with unusual urgency. Before we begin formal proceedings, I must share something unprecedented. In the past month, 17 different species have independently requested permission to establish peaceful contact with humanity. This is the largest diplomatic initiative in recorded galactic history. A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. Peaceful first contact was virtually unknown among galactic civilizations. Most species were either conquered, absorbed, or maintained at arm's length until their threat level could be properly assessed. Furthermore, Malthus continued, we have received over 200 requests from individual citizens across 40 different worlds, asking for permission to visit human space. Not for conquest, not for trade negotiations, but for what they describe as cultural exchange and learning opportunities. Senator Zephyria's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. Are we to understand that exposure to human children has somehow infected our populations with their pacifist tendencies? That's exactly what we need to determine, replied Dr. Alanis of the Healers Guild. My medical teams have been analyzing the psychological profiles of every agent involved in Project Innocence. The results are unlike anything we've seen before. She activated a holographic display showing brain scans from multiple species. These images represent neurological activity before and after human contact. In every case, we observe increased activity in regions associated with empathy, nurturing behaviors, and social bonding. More significantly, these changes appear to be permanent. General thorax scarred features twisted into a scowl. You're suggesting that human children possess some form of biological weapon that alters brain chemistry? Not a weapon, Dr. Lonnie's corrected. These neurological changes are entirely beneficial. Subjects report decreased aggression, improved emotional regulation, and enhanced capacity for cooperative problem solving. If anything, human contact appears to optimize brain function across species lines. The implications were staggering. If humans could permanently alter the psychological makeup of other species through mere interaction, they represented either the greatest threat or the greatest opportunity in galactic history. I request permission to address the Council, said a voice from the observation gallery. All eyes turned to see Commander Slash of the reptilian hegemony rising from his seat. His presence at the Council was highly irregular, as field operatives rarely addressed the assembly directly. Permission granted, Malthus replied, curiosity evident in his ancient voice. Slash approached the central podium with the measured steps of a career soldier, but something had changed in his bearing. The predatory grace that characterized all reptilian warriors was still present, but tempered by an unfamiliar gentleness. Honored representatives, Slash began, I stand before you as someone who has experienced firsthand what we're discussing. 37 days ago, I was a proud warrior of the reptilian hegemony, convinced of our natural superiority over all other species. I believed that strength was the only currency that mattered in the galaxy. He paused, his claws scraping softly against the podium. The human children I observed changed that perspective not through force, but through a simple question. Why don't you say thank you to the animals you hunt? The chamber fell silent as Slash continued. That question led me to examine assumptions I had never questioned. Why do we take pride in causing suffering? Why do we consider mercy a weakness? Why do we believe that dominance was more valuable than cooperation? General Thorak leaned forward aggressively. And what answers did you find, Commander? I found that we have been living as lesser versions of ourselves, Slash replied without hesitation. The humans didn't make me weak. They showed me strength I never knew existed. The strength to choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over ignorance, hope over fear. Representative Quinn of the Mechanoid Collective processed this information with mechanical precision. Are you suggesting that human influence represents an evolutionary advantage? I'm suggesting that human children possess something we've lost or never developed, Slash answered. They see the best possible version of everyone they meet and somehow help them become that person. When a human child looks at a reptilian warrior, they don't see a killer. They see someone who could be gentle, who could be caring, who could choose to protect rather than destroy. Dr. Alanis nodded thoughtfully. This aligns with our neurological findings. Human interaction appears to activate dormant neural pathways associated with prosocial behaviors. In essence, they're helping other species evolve psychologically in real time. The chamber erupted as representatives began arguing among themselves. Some species saw this as an opportunity for unprecedented advancement, while others viewed it as a threat to their traditional power structures. Silence. High Arbiter Malthus commanded. We have received a communication from the human government. They are requesting a formal diplomatic meeting. The announcement stunned the assembly into immediate quiet. In galactic politics, new species typically had to petition for years before being granted audience with the Council. The fact that the humans were proactively seeking contact suggested a level of confidence that was either admirably bold or dangerously naive. Were there terms? Asked Senator Zephyria. Malthus consulted his datapad. They wished to send a delegation of 12 representatives to address the Council directly. The unusual aspect is their requested composition: 6 adults and 6 children. The chamber exploded in shocked exclamations. Never in galactic history had juveniles been included in formal diplomatic proceedings. The idea was so unprecedented that most species lack protocols for how to respond. They specifically request that the children be allowed to participate fully in all discussions. Malthus continued once order was restored. They claim the human diplomatic philosophy emphasizes the importance of including those who will inherit the consequences of today's decisions. Commander Slash stepped forward again. If I may, honored representatives, I believe we should accept their proposal. On what grounds? Demanded General Thorak. Slash's voice carried new conviction. Because in 37 days of observation, I learned more about effective leadership from human children than I had in decades of military training. If they're willing to share that knowledge with us, shouldn't we have the wisdom to listen? The vote was closer than anyone expected, but ultimately the Council agreed to host humanity's unprecedented diplomatic mission. As representatives filed out to prepare for first contact, each carried the same unspoken question. In a galaxy that had forgotten how to hope, were they about to meet the teachers they never knew they needed? The greatest diplomatic encounter in galactic history would hinge not on military might or technological advancement, but on whether the universe's most powerful civilizations could learn from its most innocent teachers. The day of first contact dawned with unprecedented security measures throughout the galactic capital. Council Station, a massive structure that served as the hub of interstellar diplomacy, had never hosted beings as mysterious and potentially dangerous as humans. Every representative species had positioned their finest guards, while medical teams stood ready to counter any unknown psychological effects. High Arbiter Malthus reviewed the final preparations from his private chamber, his ancient mind grappling with the magnitude of what was about to unfold. In all his millennia of existence, he had never witnessed such galaxy-wide anticipation for a diplomatic meeting. Reports indicated that entire worlds had suspended normal operations to watch the live broadcasts. The human delegation's arrival ship was, like everything else about them, deceptively simple. The vessel appeared to be an upgraded version of a standard diplomatic transport, with none of the intimidating design elements that typically characterize ships belonging to major galactic powers. As it docked with Council Station, sensor arrays detected no unusual weapons or defensive systems. When the airlock opened, the galaxy held its collective breath. The human adults emerged first, a diverse group representing their species' various ethnicities and cultures. They moved with quiet confidence, their eyes taking in the magnificent architecture of the council chambers with obvious appreciation rather than the calculating assessment that most first-time visitors displayed. Then came the children. Even the most hardened military observers found themselves leaning forward as 6 human juveniles stepped into the station. They ranged in apparent age from perhaps 5 to 12 years old, and their reactions to the alien environment were pure, unfiltered wonder. "Wow," breathed a small girl with dark skin and elaborate braids, staring up at the crystal formations that decorated the walls. "It's like being inside a rainbow." A boy with sandy hair immediately approached the nearest security guard, a massive Brutarian whose scarred hide had seen countless battles. "Excuse me," the child said politely. "Are you a real space warrior? That's so cool. Do you protect everyone here?" The Brutarian, trained to intimidate through his very presence, found himself kneeling to the boy's eye level. Yes, small one. I guard this place." "Thank you for keeping everyone safe," the child replied with genuine gratitude. "That must be a really important job." The exchange was broadcast live across 47 worlds, and in that moment, billions of beings witnessed something unprecedented. One of the galaxy's most feared warriors struggling to maintain his composure in the face of innocent appreciation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human delegation's lead diplomat, stepped forward to address the assembly. "Honored representatives, we come before you not as conquerors or supplicants, but as neighbors hoping to build something beautiful together." Her words were translated into dozens of languages, but their meaning transcended mere linguistics. The humans weren't following any known diplomatic protocol. They weren't making demands, offering trades, or issuing threats. They were simply expressing hope. "We understand that our recent encounters with your citizens have raised questions about our intentions and capabilities," Dr. Vasquez continued. "We're here to provide answers, not through formal presentations or data files, but through the most direct means possible, by allowing you to meet us as we truly are." High Arbiter Malthus rose from his throne, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Humanity, you have requested an unprecedented diplomatic format. Before we proceed, the Council must understand. Why did you choose to include juveniles in these proceedings?" A girl named Sarah, perhaps 8 years old, raised her hand as if she were in a classroom. "Because grown-ups sometimes forget what really matters," she said simply. "Kids remember that everyone just wants to be happy and safe and have friends." The profundity of this statement, delivered with childlike directness, created ripples of amazement throughout the assembly. In a single sentence, this human child had articulated the foundational desire that drove every species toward civilization. "May I ask you a question?" Sarah continued, addressing High Arbiter Malthus directly. The ancient being who had presided over the rise and fall of civilizations found himself nodding to a human child. "Certainly. Are you happy being in charge of everything? It seems like it would be really hard and maybe lonely sometimes." The question struck at the core of Malthus's existence with surgical precision. For millennia, he had borne the weight of galactic governance, making decisions that affected trillions of lives while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for objective leadership. No one had ever asked if he was happy. "It is challenging," he admitted, his voice softer than anyone had heard it in centuries. Sarah nodded sympathetically. "My mom says that when something is hard, it helps to have friends to share the difficult parts. Maybe that's why there are so many different people here. Nobody has to carry everything alone." The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. The Galactic Council, ostensibly a cooperative body, had functioned more as a careful balance of competing interests. The idea that they could be true allies, supporting each other through shared challenges, was revolutionary. Commander / rose from his observer's position. Honored representatives, I request permission to share what I have learned. Malthus nodded, and / addressed the assembly with newfound eloquence. These beings have shown us that strength and kindness are not opposing forces. They are complementary aspects of true power. When we choose cruelty, we diminish ourselves. When we choose compassion, we become more than we ever imagined possible. A boy named Marcus stepped forward, his hand slipping naturally into / massive claw. Commander / taught us about his planet's singing caves, Marcus announced. We'd like to visit someday and learn more about reptilian music. Maybe we could have a big concert with songs from all different worlds. The image of interstellar cultural exchange, presented as casually as a child's playdate invitation, painted a picture of possibilities that none of the assembled representatives had ever considered. Not trade agreements or military alliances, but genuine friendship between species. Dr. Vasquez smiled warmly at the assembly. This is humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not advanced technology or superior firepower, but perspective. Our children see the universe as it could be rather than as it is. They look at each of you and see not alien threats or potential conquests, but friends they haven't met yet. As if to demonstrate this point, the human children began moving through the assembly, approaching representatives from different species with obvious excitement. They asked about home worlds, admired unique physiological features, and shared simple gifts they had brought: drawings, small toys, flowers from Earth. High Arbiter Malthus watched in amazement as the most formal diplomatic gathering in galactic history transformed into something resembling a celebration. Species that had maintained careful distance from each other for millennia were sharing stories, laughing at cross-cultural misunderstandings, and discovering common ground that had always existed beneath their differences. A small girl named Lucy approached his throne, carrying a hand-drawn picture. "I made this for you," she said, offering the artwork with both hands. The drawing showed dozens of different alien figures standing together under a sky filled with stars, all of them smiling. At the center was a figure that could only be Malthus himself, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, all holding hands. "It's all of us being friends," Lucy explained. "Because friends take care of each other, and that makes everyone stronger." As Malthus accepted the picture with hands that trembled slightly, he realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had made the impossible seem inevitable. The idea of 47 species working together not out of necessity or fear, but out of genuine care for each other's well-being, no longer seemed like naive idealism. It seemed like hope. The formal diplomatic session concluded with the signing of the Friendship Accord, a document unlike any treaty in galactic history. Rather than defining territories or trade relationships, it established principles for mutual support, cultural exchange, and cooperative exploration of the universe's mysteries. As the human delegation prepared to depart, representatives from across the galaxy found themselves making plans to visit Earth, to learn from human educational systems, to bring their own children for cultural exchange programs. The galaxy's most feared warriors were requesting permission to attend human schools. Commander / now serving as the first reptilian ambassador to humanity, summarized the day's events in his final report. Today, the galaxy learned that there is a force more powerful than any weapon, more valuable than any resource, and more transformative than any technology. That force is the simple human belief that everyone deserves to be loved, and that love makes all of us stronger than we could ever be alone. The age of galactic warfare was ending, not through conquest or surrender, but through the radical idea that former enemies could become family. And it had all begun with a human child asking a Vorthack warrior why he was being mean to her parents. In the end, the galaxy's fiercest aliens had indeed learned to fear a human child. They feared her capacity to show them who they could become if they chose love over hatred, hope over despair, and cooperation over domination. It was the most beautiful fear in the universe. The Galactic Council chambers had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence as Admiral Krex of the Vorthak Empire delivered his report. His 4 arms trembled as he spoke, each word carefully measured to avoid any hint of the terror that had consumed his fleet. The human vessel was unremarkable, Krex began, his voice barely above a whisper. A simple transport ship, designation Morning Star. Our sensors detected minimal weapons, standard defensive shields, and a crew of only 12. It should have been a routine inspection. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy as apex predators. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, with razor-sharp claws and armor-like carapaces, they had conquered 17 star systems through sheer brutality. Their reputation for ruthlessness was so well established that most species simply surrendered upon seeing their distinctive crimson warships. "You boarded the vessel?" inquired Senator Zephyria, her crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. The Etherians rarely showed emotion, making her obvious concern all the more unsettling. "We attempted to," Krex replied, his mandibles clicking anxiously. "My warriors breached the airlock without resistance. The humans offered no initial opposition. They simply watched us. Even when we demanded they submit to inspection, they remained calm. Unnaturally calm." The council murmured among themselves. Humans were a relatively new species to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years prior. They were considered primitive by most standards, lacking the advanced technology, psychic abilities, or physical prowess that defined the major galactic powers. "What changed?" asked General Thorak of the Brittarian Horde, his massive frame leaning forward with interest. The Brittarians respected strength above all else, and any species that could unnerve the Vorthak demanded attention. Krex's eyes darkened. The child appeared. A collective intake of breath rippled through the chamber. Even species that didn't breathe seemed to react to the weight of those words. "She couldn't have been more than 7 of their years," Krex continued. "Small, fragile-looking, with that pale skin and strange-colored eyes they possess. She was carrying some sort of stuffed creature, a toy of some kind. My warriors laughed when they saw her." "Laughed?" The Admiral paused, his claws scraping against the podium. "The girl looked at my second-in-command, Lieutenant Vex, and asked him why he was being mean to her family. Vex is a veteran of the Sector Wars, decorated for his brutality in 17 campaigns. He's personally executed over 3,000 prisoners without hesitation." "And?" prompted Thorak impatiently. "He started crying," Krex said quietly. "This hardened killer, this veteran warrior, began sobbing like a hatchling. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, apologizing over and over again. The child walked up to him and patted his arm, telling him it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Several representatives demanded clarification. Others questioned the Admiral's sanity. The idea that a human child could break a Vorthak warrior mentally was beyond comprehension. "Silence," commanded High Arbiter Malthus, his ancient voice cutting through the chaos. The Archon leader was older than most civilizations, and his word carried absolute authority. "Continue your report, Admiral." Krex nodded gratefully. "That was when I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The girl wasn't using any technology we could detect. No psychic emanations that our sensors could measure. Yet somehow, she was affecting my warriors on a fundamental level." He activated a holographic display showing the interior of the human ship. The images were grainy, taken from his warriors' helmet cameras before the mission went catastrophically wrong. "As you can see, the child approaches each of my soldiers in turn. She asks them simple questions. Are you sad? Do you miss your home? When did you last see your family?" Normal, innocent questions that any child might ask. The footage showed heavily armed Vorthack warriors, each capable of tearing through steel with their bare claws, reduced to emotional wrecks by a small human girl. Some wept openly, others sat in stunned silence. A few had removed their helmets and were staring at holographic images of their own offspring. She offered them juice boxes, Krex added, his voice hollow with disbelief. Small containers of sweetened liquid that human children consume. My warriors accepted them eagerly, as if they were precious gifts rather than simple refreshments. The implications were staggering. If humans possessed some unknown ability to neutralize even the galaxy's most feared warriors, the entire balance of power could shift overnight. The council members exchanged worried glances as they began to grasp the magnitude of what they were hearing. Admiral, Malthus said slowly, "What happened to your boarding party?" Krex's proud military bearing finally crumbled completely. They refused to leave.